Behind mansion walls, a chance discovery leads to DNA results that shake a dynasty's foundation. Within the world of privilege, two small faces mirror impossible truth that wealth cannot deny. Between suspicion and science lies a story that proves family bonds transcend employment contracts. As laboratory findings circulate through society's highest circles, everything changes. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The Beaumont mansion hummed with a quiet, unsettling energy. Sunlight, filtering through stained glass windows, cast kaleidoscopic patterns on the polished mahogany floors. 11-year-old Maya, perched on a window seat, traced the intricate designs with a finger, her brow furrowed in concentration. Her younger brother, Leo, 7, played silently with a small, worn wooden toy soldier, his gaze fixed on Maya. Their mother, Elena, moved through the grand hall, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips as she watched them. The air, thick with the scent of beeswax and old money, held a subtle tension, a whisper of secrets barely concealed beneath the opulent facade. Elena's heart ached with a familiar longing. She loved her children fiercely, a love forged in the crucible of their shared, somewhat precarious existence within these walls. The Beaumonts, their employers, were a distant constellation of privilege, their lives a stark contrast to her own. Arthur, the patriarch, was a man of steely resolve and cold politeness. His wife, Vivian, drifted through their gilded cage, a fragile porcelain doll teetering on the edge of a breakdown. Their adult children, rarely seen, were equally aloof. This life, though secure, felt like gilded cage. Elena yearned for more for her children, a life beyond the shadows of the Beaumont dynasty. A life where Maya wouldn't have to gaze longingly at the sparkling jewels adorning Vivian's hand, and Leo wouldn't have to whisper his dreams into the plush velvet of an antique armchair. But fear, a cold serpent coiling around her heart, kept her silent, bound by a loyalty born of necessity and tempered by years of unspoken anxieties. Tonight, however, a small seed of defiance began to sprout within her. A forgotten box, discovered tucked away in a dusty attic, held the key. The attic air hung heavy with the scent of dust and forgotten things. Moonlight, filtering through a grimy window, illuminated the contents of the old wooden box. Faded photographs, brittle letters tied with yellowed ribbon. Elena's fingers trembled as she carefully unfolded a sepia-toned image. A younger Arthur Beaumont, his face softer, less severe, stood beside a woman with eyes strikingly similar to Maya's. A chill prickled Elena's skin. "Mama," Maya whispered, her voice barely audible. "Who is that lady?" Elena swallowed, her throat tight. "It's someone from the past, sweetheart," she murmured, her voice strained. Leo, ever observant, pointed a tiny finger at a handwritten inscription on the back of the photograph. It says, "Isabel." That night, Elena sat by the window, the photograph clutched in her hand. The moonlight painted her face in shades of gray and silver, highlighting the turmoil in her eyes. The letter spoke of a passionate love affair, a secret kept hidden for decades, a love that had resulted in a child who could very well be related to her own. The weight of this discovery pressed down on her, heavier than any physical burden. What if they are family?" she whispered to the silent room, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. Fear warred with a burgeoning hope, a desperate desire for a better future for her children. The truth, she knew, held the potential to shatter the carefully constructed world of the Beaumonts, but it also held the key to unlocking a life beyond the confines of their opulent prison. The risk was immense, the consequences unpredictable, but the longing for a true home, for a family history that wasn't built on silence and secrets, had finally overpowered her fear. The next morning, Elena's hands moved with a purpose born of desperation and love. She carefully packaged a small DNA sample, a silent prayer for answers hidden within. The act, simple yet revolutionary, felt like a rebellion against the life she had always known. As she slipped the package into a prepaid envelope, Maya quietly watched her, her usually bright eyes clouded with a profound sense of concern. "Mama," she said softly, Are you okay? Elena forced a smile. Just taking care of something important, my love, she replied, her voice slightly trembling. The future remained uncertain, a vast unknown stretching before them. But for the first time in a long time, a seed of hope had taken root, nestled deep within the soil of her courageous heart. The truth, whatever its form, would finally see the light. The sterile white of the laboratory felt a world away from the opulent, dusty confines of the Beaumont mansion. Elena clutched the results, the crisp paper crinkling in her trembling hand. The words swam before her eyes, blurring in a chaotic dance of disbelief and dawning horror. A single, stark sentence pierced through the medical jargon. 99.99% probability of paternal relationship. The air thickened, the scent of antiseptic suddenly sharp and suffocating. Maya, sensing her mother's distress, reached out a small hand, her touch tentative, comforting. "Mama," she whispered, her voice fragile. Leo, ever the observer, clung to Maya's leg, his large eyes mirroring her apprehension. Elena knelt, pulling her children close, the cool tiles a stark contrast to the warmth of their small bodies. The weight of the revelation pressed down on her, crushing her with its impossible implications. This wasn't just a discovery. It was a seismic shift, threatening to topple their fragile world. The silence stretched, broken only by the soft sobs escaping Elena's lips. It means, she stammered, her voice choked with emotion. "Your father, he's..." She couldn't bring herself to say the words, the truth too devastating to utter aloud. The reality of Arthur Beaumont's secret, of a hidden past, of her children's unknown heritage, solidified in the silence. Maya, ever perceptive, sensed the gravity of the situation. Her innocent question hung in the air, tinged with a child's unease that amplified Elena's silent despair. "Is he really our father, Mama?" Elena couldn't answer. The question was both a simple statement and a painful truth. The weight of the revelation, the potential fallout, the fear for her children's future. It was all too much. She looked at their faces, two small mirrors reflecting her own turmoil. They were her world, her everything, and this secret, this truth, threatened to shatter their lives irrevocably. The scent of antiseptic faded, replaced by the heavy, suffocating scent of fear. The fight ahead felt insurmountable. The journey toward justice, for herself and her children, had just begun. The drive home was a blur, the familiar landscape of sprawling estates and manicured lawns seeming alien, distorted through the lens of Elena's grief. The car's plush leather felt cold against her skin, a stark contrast to the warmth of Maya and Leo huddled close beside her. Silence, thick and suffocating, reigned in the back seat. Maya's usual chatter was silenced, replaced by a quiet solemnity that mirrored Leo's unusually still posture. The sunlight, usually a comforting presence, felt harsh, unforgiving. Elena glanced at her children, their faces etched with a confusion that mirrored her own bewilderment. Maya, her usually bright eyes clouded with worry, occasionally reached out to touch Leo's hand. He, in turn, squeezed hers, his small fingers a silent reassurance in the overwhelming silence. The familiar, comforting rhythm of their family was fractured, the silence a chasm between them. Pulling into the Beaumont driveway, the opulent mansion loomed, its grandeur suddenly oppressive. The meticulously kept gardens, usually a source of quiet beauty, felt like a mocking display of wealth, a stark reminder of the chasm that separated their lives from the gilded cage of the Beaumonts. "Mama," Maya whispered, breaking the silence, her voice barely audible above the whirring of the engine as Elena switched it off. Are we going to tell them?" The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken anxieties. Elena felt a tightening in her chest, a knot of fear and guilt constricting her breath. How could she tell them? How could she expose the truth about their lives, about the family that had provided a roof but not a home? "We need to," Elena managed, her voice hoarse, the words feeling like stones in her throat. "But we need a plan. We need time." She forced a smile, a weak, unconvincing mask to hide the turmoil within. It was a lie, a fragile shield against the fear that threatened to consume her. The weight of the secret, the implications for her children's future, pressed down on her with the crushing weight of the mansion itself. She watched as Maya and Leo, sensing the depth of her distress, shifted closer, their small bodies providing a small measure of comfort against the monumental task ahead. In their innocent eyes, Elena saw the reflection of her own courage, of a mother's unwavering love, and the fight, however daunting, that must be waged to protect them. The fight for their truth. The journey towards justice had only just begun, but for the first time, a fragile hope flickered, ignited by her children's unwavering trust and her own desperate need to protect them. The old wooden box lay open on Elena's kitchen table, its contents spilling onto the worn, checkered tablecloth. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of sunlight slicing through the grimy window pane, illuminating faded photographs and brittle letters tied with yellowed ribbon. The scent of lemon polish, a familiar comfort in the Beaumont household, battled with the musty aroma of aged paper and forgotten memories. Maya, perched on a stool, traced a finger across a sepia-toned photograph showing a young woman with strikingly familiar eyes that mirrored her own. "Mama," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the rhythmic tick-tock of the ancient grandfather clock in the hallway. "Is that you?" Elena's heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She swallowed hard, the lump in her throat constricting her breath. "It's a family resemblance, sweetheart," she murmured, her voice trembling slightly. The truth, a volatile cocktail of fear and excitement, churned within her. Leo, usually boisterous and full of energy, sat unusually quiet, his gaze fixed on a letter bearing the Beaumont crest. He picked it up, his small fingers carefully unfolding the fragile paper. He couldn't read, but the elegant script, the ornate seal, spoke of a world far removed from their own. He looked at his mother, his large brown eyes reflecting a silent question. Elena's gaze drifted to the letters. They hinted at a clandestine affair, a hidden pregnancy, a secret hushed within the grand walls of the Beaumont mansion for decades. The photographs, a visual timeline of a forbidden love, intensified her unease. The casual elegance of the snapshots clashed with the stark reality of her own concealed existence within this world of privilege. Her loyalty to the Beaumonts warred with a burgeoning sense of justice, a ferocious protective instinct for her children. "Mama," Maya said again, her voice slightly louder this time. It's like a puzzle, isn't it?" Elena nodded, unable to speak, the weight of the discovery pressing down on her. The puzzle pieces, scattered across the table, were fragments of a hidden history, a history that could irrevocably alter their lives. The comforting illusion of stability she had carefully constructed for her children crumbled before her eyes. This was more than just a puzzle. It was a truth waiting to be unveiled, a truth with the potential to shatter the carefully constructed world around them. The decision to uncover it, to risk everything, felt both terrifying and liberating. The journey had begun. The chipped enamel of the kitchen sink felt cold beneath Elena's trembling hands. The scent of lemon polish, usually a balm to her soul, now felt suffocating. Outside, the manicured lawns of the Beaumont estate whispered secrets in the wind. Inside, the silence was thick, heavy with unspoken anxieties. Maya, her usually bright eyes clouded with a nascent understanding, clung to her doll. Leo, sensing the shift in his mother's demeanor, sat quietly, his small hand tracing the intricate carvings of the kitchen table. "Mama," Maya whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "Are we in trouble?" Elena knelt, her heart aching at the fear mirroring her own. The weight of the old letters and photographs pressed down on her, a physical manifestation of the truth threatening to unravel everything. She traced the delicate curve of Maya's cheek, the soft skin a stark contrast to the harsh reality she faced. "No, sweetheart," she murmured, her voice a fragile whisper. "We're not in trouble. We're discovering something." The lie felt bitter on her tongue. The discovery was far from a simple puzzle. It was a Pandora's box of secrets, revealing a hidden connection between her children and the Beaumont family. A connection so improbable it felt like a cruel joke. The faded photographs, capturing a young woman with Maya's eyes and Leo's determined jawline, were more than just images. They were accusations, whispered promises, a testament to a past deliberately obscured. Leo, his brow furrowed in concentration, pointed a chubby finger at a photograph. "That's like me," he stated, his voice filled with a childlike wonder that both pierced and comforted Elena. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. The resemblance wasn't just a coincidence. It was a glaring truth, staring back at her from the brittle, yellowed pages. The fear, a constant companion for years, intensified, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. But beneath the terror, a fierce protectiveness flared, an unwavering resolve to protect her children, no matter the cost. The familiar comfort of the Beaumont kitchen, the place where she had found a precarious haven, suddenly felt alien. The opulent surroundings, once a source of quiet resentment, now symbolized a web of deceit and manipulation she was inextricably caught in. The decision loomed, a stark choice between loyalty and truth, between the security of silence and the uncertain freedom of revelation. The weight of that decision, the potential consequences, the potential for devastation, pressed down on her, threatening to crush her. But in her children's eyes, she saw a reflection of her own courage, a silent promise of resilience, a shared journey into the unknown. The envelope felt slick and cold in Elena's hand, the stark white stark against the worn wood of the kitchen table. The scent of rosemary from Vivian Beaumont's perpetually simmering potpourri couldn't mask the metallic tang of fear clenching her stomach. Maya, sensing her mother's tension, tugged at her apron. "Mama, what is it?" Elena forced a smile, a fragile thing cracking under the weight of the anticipation. "Just some things for work, sweetheart." The lie felt hollow, even to her own ears. Inside the envelope, a single sheet of paper, crisp and official, contained the results. She avoided Leo's curious gaze, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She stepped away from the children, retreating to the quiet solitude of the pantry, the air thick with the scent of preserved peaches and old flour. The words swam before her eyes, a blur of numbers and scientific jargon that slowly resolved into a stark, undeniable truth. A truth that chilled her to the bone. The connection wasn't just a possibility. It was irrefutable. A gasp escaped her lips, a choked sound swallowed by the silence of the pantry. The peaches, once comforting, now felt suffocating. Her reflection in the dusty glass jar offered a glimpse of a woman on the precipice. The woman staring back, etched with years of quiet desperation and concealed longing, was both familiar and unrecognizable. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the already shaky script. Her fingers trembled as she reread the confirmation. A 99.99% probability of paternity. The weight of it pressed down, heavy and suffocating. What did this mean for Maya? For Leo? For her? For the carefully constructed world within these walls? She knew this discovery would shatter the fragile peace she had painstakingly built. This truth, a seismic shift, threatened to unravel everything. The pantry's stale air hung heavy, thick with the scent of preserved peaches and forgotten dreams. Elena clutched the DNA results, the crisp paper a stark contrast to the rough wood of the shelf. Her reflection in the dusty glass jar showed a stranger haunted eyes, lips pressed into a thin, pale line. The 99.99% probability hammered in her chest, a relentless drumbeat against the silence. Maya's small voice, barely a whisper, pierced the stillness. "Mama, are you all right?" Elena's heart lurched. She forced a shaky smile, her voice a mere breath. "Just a little tired, sweetheart." The lie tasted like ash. Leo, ever observant, approached cautiously, his brow furrowed with concern. He reached out a small hand, touching her arm. The warmth of his touch was a fragile lifeline. She knelt, pulling her children close, the scent of their hair Maya's sweet shampoo, Leo's earthy scent of the outdoors, a grounding force. The weight of the truth pressed down, but the love radiating from her children warmed her against the icy fear. She had to protect them, even if it meant facing the wrath of the Beaumont family. "Mama," Maya whispered again, her eyes wide and questioning. "What's in your hand?" Elena hesitated. How could she explain this shattering truth to her innocent children? The opulent world they knew, the seemingly unshakable foundation of the Beaumont mansion, was about to crumble. The familiar rhythm of the family's life, their quiet comfort within these walls, was poised on the edge of a cataclysmic change. She looked at Leo, at Maya. The familiar comfort of their presence was all that stood between her and the overwhelming terror. The truth, once discovered, could not be contained. This wasn't just a secret, it was a bomb. And Elena, with a heart filled with fear and love in equal measure, was holding the detonator. The worn leather of the armchair felt cool against Elena's cheek as she stared at the DNA results. The crisp, clinical language blurred, the percentages swimming before her tear-filled eyes. The scent of old paper and dust from the forgotten box mingled with the faint, lingering sweetness of Vivian Beaumont's perfume. A scent that now felt tainted, a cruel irony. Maya, sensing her mother's distress, climbed onto the sofa beside her, her small hand reaching for Elena's. Leo, ever the watchful one, sat on the floor, his gaze fixed on his mother's face, mirroring the worry etched there. "Mama," Maya whispered, her voice thick with concern. "You're crying." Elena swallowed, the lump in her throat making speech difficult. It's just a headache, sweetheart." The lie felt heavy, a suffocating weight in her chest. The truth, however, felt heavier still, a crushing burden she wasn't sure she could bear. It wasn't just her own life that was at stake. It was the future of her children, the future she had painstakingly built within the walls of this opulent prison. Leo's silence was more unsettling than Maya's questions. His brow was furrowed, his usually bright eyes clouded with apprehension. He understood more than she had anticipated. Children, particularly those as observant as Leo, absorbed far more than they let on. She pulled them close, the warmth of their small bodies against hers a fragile shield against the storm raging within. The opulent tapestry of the Beaumont drawing room, with its gleaming furniture and priceless art, faded into the background, a stark contrast to the raw emotion enveloping them. The mansion, once a symbol of security, now felt like a gilded cage. A sudden gust of wind rattled the window panes, a chilling premonition. The comfortable rhythm of their lives, the quiet security they had found within these walls, hung precariously. The results were undeniable. A shocking link between her children and the Beaumont family, a truth that threatened to dismantle everything. Elena knew with chilling certainty that this was only the beginning. The whispers in the walls were about to become a roar. She held her children tighter, a fierce protective instinct surging through her. They were her world, her reason, her everything, and she would fight for them, for their future, for the truth, no matter the cost. The weight of the DNA results pressed down on Elena, a physical burden mirroring the emotional turmoil churning within. The ornate Beaumont drawing room, usually a symbol of their comfortable, if precarious, existence, felt suffocating. Dust motes danced in the afternoon sunbeams slicing through the tall windows, each one a tiny, mocking reminder of the secrets hidden within these walls. Maya, sensing her mother's distress, nestled closer, her small hand finding Elena's. Leo, ever the observer, sat silently, his usually bright eyes shadowed with a worry that mirrored Elena's own. "Mama," Maya whispered, her voice barely audible above the ticking grandfather clock in the hall. "Are you all right?" Elena forced a smile, the effort painful. "Just tired, sweetheart," she murmured, her voice catching. The lie tasted like ash in her mouth. The truth, a monstrous secret threatening to shatter their carefully constructed world, felt too immense to share. Yet, Leo's quiet intensity, the way his small hand instinctively reached for Maya's, told her he knew more than she had realized. His silence, more unsettling than Maya's questions, hinted at a child's uncanny ability to absorb unspoken anxieties. She pulled them closer, their small bodies a comforting weight against hers. The scent of lavender from her worn cardigan mingled with the faint, lingering sweetness of Vivienne Beaumont's perfume, a scent that now felt poisonous, a cruel reminder of the gilded cage they inhabited. The opulent tapestry, usually a source of quiet awe, now seemed a mocking display of wealth, a stark contrast to the raw fear gripping her heart. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the clock, each tick a hammer blow against her fragile composure. The DNA results weren't just lines on a page. They were a death sentence to their current life, a threat to the future she envisioned for her children. But it was also, she realized with a shudder of anticipation, a lifeline. The truth, however devastating, offered the possibility of a different life, a life free from the shadows lurking behind the Beaumont family's polished facade. The cost of that freedom, however, was still unknown, a terrifying uncertainty looming over her like a storm cloud. Elena slipped the results into her worn apron pocket, the paper crinkling like autumn leaves. The Beaumonts' imposing kitchen, usually a haven of controlled chaos, felt alien. The scent of roasting pheasant, usually comforting, now nauseated her. Leo, perched on a stool, watched her with an unnerving intensity. His small hand tightened around his sister's, a silent communication she understood all too well. "Mama," Maya whispered, her voice small. "Is it bad news?" Elena knelt, forcing a smile that felt brittle. "No, sweetheart, just complicated." The lie felt like a betrayal, even to herself. The DNA results weren't just bad news. They were a seismic shift, threatening to topple their entire world. The thought sent a shiver down her spine, a cold dread that mirrored the chill settling in the late afternoon air filtering through the kitchen window. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed 5, each bong a heavy hammer blow against her carefully constructed composure. She reached for Maya's hand, her touch hesitant. The soft skin of her daughter's hand, usually a source of comfort, now felt like a fragile link to a future she couldn't guarantee. Leo, usually boisterous, remained silent, his gaze unwavering. His silence spoke volumes. He wasn't just observing. He was absorbing, intuiting the depth of her fear. He seemed to understand the implications of the test, a terrifying understanding beyond his years. A quiet understanding passed between them, a silent acknowledgement of the precariousness of their situation. The gilded cage, the opulent kitchen, the comforting routine, all of it felt threatened. The future, once a hopeful canvas, now seemed a stormy sea, full of uncertainties and unseen dangers. Elena knew she couldn't keep this secret from them forever. The weight of the truth, pressing down on her, threatened to crush her spirit. It was time to prepare them, to arm them with the truth, however harsh, however shattering. The decision, as terrifying as it was, felt like the only path forward. The comfortable illusion of normalcy had shattered, replaced by a raw, uncomfortable truth. But within that truth, Elena sensed a glimmer of hope, a potential for a life far different, and perhaps far better than the one she'd known. The heavy oak door to the pantry creaked shut, the sound swallowed by the vastness of the Beaumont mansion. Elena clutched the DNA results, the paper a cold, unsettling weight against her palm. The air hung thick with the scent of beeswax and dust, a familiar comfort now tinged with anxiety. Leo, ever observant, watched from the corner, his small hand tracing patterns on the worn wooden floor. Maya, curled up on a plush velvet cushion, pretended to be engrossed in a tattered picture book, but her fidgeting betrayed her. "Mama," Maya whispered, finally, her voice barely audible above the rhythmic tick-tock of the grandfather clock. "What's wrong?" Elena forced a smile, the effort a physical ache in her chest. "Nothing, sweetheart. Just some paperwork." The lie tasted like ash in her mouth. She knelt beside Maya, her fingers brushing against her daughter's soft hair. The familiar comfort was a frail shield against the storm brewing inside her. Leo, his usual playful energy subdued, climbed onto her lap. His small fingers, surprisingly strong, gripped her hand. His silence was more unsettling than words, a silent acknowledgement of the unspoken tension. He looked up at her, his large, dark eyes mirroring her own fear. He didn't need words to understand. He felt it, too, the seismic shift threatening to topple their carefully constructed world. The opulent kitchen, usually a source of quiet joy, now felt claustrophobic. The gleaming copper pots, the polished marble countertops, the scent of roasting pheasant, once comforting, now suffocating. Each tick of the clock amplified the silence, each second stretching into an eternity of dread. Elena swallowed, the lump in her throat constricting her breath. The DNA results weren't just paperwork. They were a revelation, a truth that threatened to shatter their lives. But hiding it, she knew, was a betrayal of the trust that bound her to her children, a trust she couldn't bear to break. The weight of the secret pressed down on her, a crushing burden. She needed to tell them, needed to prepare them, for a future she couldn't yet comprehend, but one she was determined to navigate with them, hand in hand. The gilded cage, once a haven, was now a prison, a beautiful, suffocating prison. But within this gilded prison, a new determination blossomed, a fierce resolve that would redefine their lives forever. The following days were a blur of stolen moments and whispered anxieties. Elena found herself scrutinizing every interaction with the Beaumont family, searching for clues, for confirmation of her suspicions. The grand house, once a comforting backdrop to her life, now felt like a gilded cage, its opulence a cruel mockery of her inner turmoil. The scent of lavender and polish, usually soothing, now triggered a knot of unease in her stomach. One evening, after tucking Maya and Leo into bed, their small forms nestled under a mountain of silk pillows, Elena found herself alone in the library. Moonlight streamed through the tall arched windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant chime of a grandfather clock. She pulled out the DNA sample, a small vial nestled in a tissue-lined box. Her hands trembled as she held it, a tangible representation of her desperate hope and her overwhelming fear. "Mama!" Leo's soft voice startled her. He stood in the doorway, his dark eyes wide and questioning. Elena's heart lurched. "Leo, darling, you're awake?" She forced a smile, the lightness cracking under the weight of her secret. He nodded, clutching a worn teddy bear. "Maya's scared," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Of the shadows." Elena's breath hitched. The shadows, she thought, were everywhere. But the most terrifying shadows were the ones lurking in the heart of the Beaumont family, the ones she was slowly beginning to uncover. She scooped Leo into her arms, his small body trembling slightly. "The shadows can't hurt us, sweetheart," she murmured, her voice catching in her throat. "We're safe here together." The lie felt heavy, a suffocating blanket. How could she possibly reassure them when her own world was crumbling? The weight of the impending results pressed down on her, an unbearable burden. Yet, in Leo's trusting gaze, she found a strength she didn't know she possessed. For them, she would face whatever came next. For them, she would fight. The DNA sample remained in her hand, a symbol of that fight, a promise to her children that she would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The moon, a silent witness, cast long shadows across the library floor, as if mirroring the uncertainties that lay ahead. But in the darkness, a flicker of defiance ignited within Elena's heart, a fierce determination to protect her children, even from the darkness within their gilded cage. The next morning, a crisp autumn breeze stirred the leaves outside Elena's small attic room. Sunlight, filtering through dusty panes, illuminated the worn wooden desk where the DNA kit lay. The anticipation was a physical weight, a constant hum beneath her skin. She'd sent the sample, a strand of Leo's hair, surreptitiously collected during his bedtime routine 3 days ago. 3 days of agonizing uncertainty. Maya, sensing her mother's tension, climbed onto her lap, her small hand finding Elena's. "Mama, are you sad?" she whispered, her voice soft as dandelion fluff. Elena forced a smile, the corners of her lips trembling slightly. "No, my love, just thinking." but her thoughts were a frantic whirlwind. What if the results confirmed her darkest fears? What if her children's lives were irrevocably altered? The weight of her secret pressed down on her, a suffocating burden. Leo, ever observant, joined them, his large brown eyes mirroring his sister's concern. He reached out and gently stroked Elena's cheek, a silent gesture of comfort that brought tears to her eyes. "We love you, Mama," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. The doorbell chimed, a sharp, jarring sound that pierced the quiet intimacy of the moment. Elena's heart leaped into her throat. Could it be? She exchanged a look with her children, their small faces etched with apprehension. With trembling hands, she smoothed her apron and descended the grand staircase. The polished wood cool beneath her bare feet. The sight of the uniformed courier, holding a small, unmarked envelope, sent a shiver of anticipation down her spine. The air crackled with unspoken questions, with the weight of a truth yet to be revealed. Her knuckles were white as she accepted the package, a simple act that felt monumental, a threshold crossed. Back in her attic room, the silence was broken only by the faint rustle of the envelope as she carefully opened it. Inside, a single sheet of paper lay folded precisely. Her breath hitched as her fingers, suddenly clumsy and fumbling, unfolded the crisp white paper. The words swam before her eyes, blurring into a meaningless jumble. Her world tilted. The truth, stark and undeniable, was finally laid bare. The paper trembled in Elena's hands, the crisp white a stark contrast to the swirling chaos in her mind. The sterile typeface mocked her racing heart. Sunlight, previously a comforting warmth, now felt harsh, highlighting the tremor in her fingers. Maya, sensing the shift in her mother's demeanor, snuggled closer, her small body a weight of comforting warmth against Elena's. Leo, ever watchful, mirrored Maya's silent concern with wide, questioning eyes. Elena cleared her throat, the sound catching in her parched throat. It's difficult to explain," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the frantic beat of her heart. The words on the page blurred, reformed, then blurred again. She needed time, a moment to gather herself, to process the impossible truth revealed in the stark, clinical language of the report. The attic room, usually a haven of quiet comfort, now felt claustrophobic, the air thick with unspoken fear. Dust motes danced in the sunbeams, a mocking ballet of indifference to the seismic shift occurring within Elena's soul. The scent of old paper and lavender, usually soothing, now felt suffocating. "Mama!" Maya's voice, a fragile thread in the tense silence, broke through Elena's thoughts. Elena swallowed, forcing herself to look at her children, at the mirrored apprehension in their eyes. "My loves," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "There's something I need to tell you, something big." Leo, his brow furrowed with concern, reached out and took her hand, his small fingers surprisingly strong. The simple gesture, so innocent yet profoundly moving, brought tears to Elena's eyes. She squeezed his hand, finding strength in their unwavering love. The weight of her secret, the burden of the truth, felt momentarily lighter, shared amongst the three of them. A small family facing an impossible storm. The DNA results were not just numbers and percentages. They were a cataclysmic event poised to change their lives forever. But as she looked at her children, at their trusting faces, she knew, with unwavering certainty, that whatever the future held, she would face it with them, her small family, united against the unknown. The doorbell rang again, a sharp, insistent chime, cutting through the fragile intimacy of the moment. It was as if the outside world, oblivious to their turmoil, demanded its entrance, its intrusion into their private grief. The insistent ringing of the doorbell shattered the fragile peace. Elena, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs, took a shaky breath. The scent of lavender from the attic's old chest lingered, a stark contrast to the metallic tang of fear coating her tongue. Maya, sensing her mother's distress, squeezed her hand tighter, her small fingers surprisingly strong. Leo, ever the watchful one, mirrored his sister's anxiety, his eyes wide and questioning. "It's all right, my loves," Elena whispered, her voice a trembling thread. She forced a smile, a fragile mask concealing the turmoil within. The truth, heavy and inescapable, pressed down on her. The DNA results were a hidden earthquake, threatening to shatter their lives. But the warmth of their tiny hands in hers, the unwavering trust in their eyes, gave her a sliver of strength. A hesitant knock followed the doorbell's insistent chime. Elena's breath hitched. It was Mrs. Albright, the Beaumont's stern housekeeper, her face etched with concern. "Mrs. Reyes," she began, her voice hushed. "Mr. Beaumont wishes to speak with you. Immediately." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Elena's stomach clenched. This was it. The moment the carefully constructed edifice of her quiet life began to crumble. She looked at her children, their innocent faces reflecting her own fear. The comforting weight of their presence, their unquestioning love, was the only anchor in the swirling storm of uncertainty. "Mama!" Maya's voice was barely a whisper, a fragile question hanging in the thick, still air of the attic. Elena knelt, pulling her children close. The old wooden floorboards creaked under her weight, a faint sound lost in the rising tide of her apprehension. Her dress, his knuckles white, Maya, usually bold and defiant, hid her face in Elena's shoulder, her body trembling. Elena, her heart a lead weight in her chest, held them close, offering silent reassurance. "It's the truth, Catherine," Isabel insisted, her voice rising in defiance, a spark of rebellion finally igniting within her. "We can't ignore it anymore. It's not just about the money. It's about who they are." She gestured towards the closed doors upstairs, her eyes wide with a dawning understanding that chilled Elena to the bone. The delicate china figurines on the mantelpiece seemed to hold their breath, mirroring the silent tension filling the room. The weight of the secret, once contained, had exploded, scattering its shards of truth across their lives. The battle for their future had truly begun. The heavy oak door creaked open, revealing Arthur Beaumont. His face, usually a mask of controlled power, was contorted with barely suppressed rage. The scent of his expensive cologne, usually comforting to Elena, now felt acrid, mirroring the bitterness in his eyes. He stopped just inside the doorway, his gaze sweeping over Elena and her children, who huddled together like frightened birds. "Elena," he spat, the word venomous. This charade ends now." His voice, usually a low rumble, was tight with fury. The air crackled with unspoken accusations. Maya, her eyes wide with fear, clutched Leo's hand tighter. Leo, usually boisterous, whimpered softly. Elena met his gaze, her own eyes blazing with a mixture of defiance and fear. The years of quiet servitude, the unspoken longing, the carefully constructed facade of loyalty, all of it seemed to melt away in the face of his accusation. "It's not a charade, Mr. Beaumont," she replied, her voice surprisingly steady. The scent of lilies, ever present in the mansion, seemed to sharpen the tension. "Don't play coy," Arthur snarled, advancing towards her. "The DNA results are undeniable. You're your children." He paused, unable to utter the word illegitimate, without betraying the raw pain and humiliation churning beneath his surface. The coldness of the marble floor felt strangely comforting beneath Elena's feet as the fear coiled in her stomach. Maya, sensing the danger, reached out and grabbed Elena's hand, her small fingers surprisingly strong. Leo, sensing her bravery, peeked from behind her, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and nascent understanding. The weight of the truth, once a whispered secret, hung heavy in the air, as heavy as the family's inherited wealth. The confrontation, years in the making, had begun. The gilded cage of their lives had become a trap. The weight of Arthur's accusation hung heavy in the air, thick and suffocating like the antique velvet drapes lining the hallway. Elena felt Maya's small hand trembling in hers, a fragile anchor against the storm brewing around them. Leo, usually a whirlwind of energy, was silent, his wide eyes reflecting the fear mirrored in his sister's. The lilies, their scent usually a comforting balm, now felt cloying, a sickly sweet counterpoint to the bitterness in the room. "You're your children," Arthur repeated, his voice cracking despite his efforts at control. The carefully cultivated veneer of composure crumbled, revealing a raw, wounded man beneath. He flinched, as if the word itself was a physical blow. Elena met his gaze, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs, but her voice remained steady. "They are my children, Mr. Beaumont, and they are your grandchildren." The words hung in the air, a stark contrast to the hushed opulence of the mansion. Arthur recoiled as if struck. He ran a hand through his silver hair, the gesture betraying the turmoil within. The polished marble floor seemed to amplify the silence that followed, a silence broken only by the soft, erratic breathing of the children. The opulent surroundings of the gleaming mahogany, the priceless paintings, seemed to mock the raw, brutal truth exposed in the heart of the Beaumont dynasty. Vivian, summoned by the raised voices, emerged from the drawing room. Her usually impeccable appearance was disheveled, her eyes wide with a confusion that bordered on terror. The sight of her fragility seemed to pierce even Arthur's anger. "Arthur, what's happening?" she whispered, her voice frail and unsteady. The question hung in the air, a poignant reminder of the fragility of their seemingly perfect world. Arthur turned to her, his anger momentarily deflected. His voice softened, but the underlying tension remained palpable. "Vivian, there's been a misunderstanding." He offered her a strained smile, a pitiful attempt at reassurance that failed to reach his eyes. The attempt at control felt brittle, like a thin sheet of ice threatening to crack under pressure. Maya, sensing the shift in the dynamic, let go of Elena's hand and stepped forward. Her small voice, barely a whisper, cut through the suffocating silence. "Grandpa, are we really your grandchildren?" The question, innocent yet laden with devastating implications, hung in the air, a stark reminder of the truth that could shatter the Beaumont family forever. The weight of the unspoken, the years of carefully constructed lies, the shattering of a carefully built life, all of it hung in the balance. The confrontation had only just begun, but the foundations of the Beaumont family had already begun to tremble. Vivian's fragile question hung in the air, a shimmering bubble about to burst. Arthur, his face a mask of controlled fury, avoided her gaze, his eyes darting towards Elena, then to the wide-eyed children. The scent of lilies, heavy and cloying, seemed to amplify the silence, a suffocating blanket in the opulent hallway. Maya clutched a worn porcelain doll, its painted eyes mirroring her own wide, fearful stare. Leo, usually a whirlwind of restless energy, remained frozen, his small hands clenched tight. "A misunderstanding," Arthur repeated, his voice a low growl, the carefully constructed facade crumbling. The words sounded hollow, even to his own ears. He felt the tremor in his hands, the sweat prickling his skin, betraying the carefully maintained composure. Elena, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, met his gaze unflinchingly. The polished marble floor felt cold beneath her bare feet, a stark contrast to the burning intensity in her eyes. "A misunderstanding?" she echoed, her voice low but firm, laced with a quiet strength that surprised even herself. "Mr. Beaumont, the DNA results don't lie." The weight of those words pressed down on the room, heavier than the antique furniture, heavier than the family's meticulously crafted reputation. A single tear traced a path down Vivian's cheek, leaving a glistening trail through her carefully applied makeup. The image of perfection, so meticulously maintained, was cracking, revealing the vulnerability beneath. Arthur's carefully controlled anger threatened to erupt. He opened his mouth to speak, to deny, to control the narrative, but the words caught in his throat. He looked at Maya and Leo, their small faces etched with confusion and fear, and for a fleeting moment, a flicker of something akin to regret crossed his features. It was quickly swallowed by a renewed wave of anger, a desperate attempt to regain control. This is a fabrication," he finally managed, his voice strained. A malicious lie. He turned to the children, his tone softening slightly, but the underlying menace was still present. Don't listen to her, children. She's trying to manipulate you. Maya's grip on her doll tightened. Leo, however, looked from his father to Elena. His brow furrowed in confusion. The carefully constructed world he knew, the world of privilege and security, was shattering before his eyes. The seeds of doubt, planted by his keen observations and now nurtured by the tense atmosphere, were beginning to sprout. He looked at Elena, his eyes seeking answers, seeking reassurance, a small glimmer of understanding dawning in his gaze. The confrontation had only begun, but the fragile equilibrium of the Beaumont family was irrevocably shattered. The ornate drawing room, usually a picture of serene elegance, felt suffocating. Dust motes danced in the shafts of afternoon sunlight, illuminating the strained expressions on each face. Vivian, her usually impeccable makeup smudged, wept silently, a fragile porcelain doll teetering on the brink of shattering. The scent of lilies, once comforting, now hung heavy, cloying, mirroring the oppressive atmosphere. Arthur, his face a mask of furious control, paced like a caged predator. His voice, when he spoke, was a low growl, barely audible above the rhythmic ticking of an antique grandfather clock. This is preposterous, a blatant lie, concocted for what? His gaze, sharp and accusing, darted between Elena and the children. Elena stood firm, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The cold marble floor offered little comfort beneath her bare feet. She met his gaze, her own eyes unwavering. It's not a lie, Mr. Beaumont. The DNA proves it. Her voice, though quiet, held a steely resolve that surprised even herself. She looked at Maya and Leo, their faces etched with a confusion that mirrored her own turmoil. Maya clung to her doll, its painted eyes reflecting her fear. Leo, usually a whirlwind of energy, was unervingly still, his small hands clenched tight. A long silence stretched between them, punctuated only by Vivian's soft sobs and the ticking clock. The weight of the unspoken hung heavy, a tangible presence in the room. Then Arthur exploded. His controlled rage shattered, unleashing a torrent of accusations and denials. He accused Elena of blackmail, of manipulating the children, of destroying his family. His words were laced with venom, each syllable a sharp jab aimed to wound. Elena listened patiently, absorbing the barrage of accusations. When he finally paused, breathless and spent, she spoke, her voice calm, reasoned. "I'm not asking for anything, Mr. Beaumont," she said, "except the truth, and for my children to know their family. That's all I've ever wanted." Her words, quiet and steady, cut through the storm of his anger like a blade through butter. The children watched, their faces a mixture of fear and dawning understanding. Leo's gaze shifted between his father and Elena, the confusion in his eyes slowly giving way to a subtle understanding of the intricate web of lies that had ensnared them. The polished surface of the Beaumont family's life had cracked, revealing the deep fissures beneath. The confrontation was far from over, but the seeds of truth had been sown. The old, familiar world had crumbled, and a new, uncertain future awaited. The news exploded across social media, a wildfire consuming the Beaumont dynasty's carefully cultivated image. Headlines screamed betrayal, scandal, and a secret that shattered the facade of perfect privilege. The opulent Beaumont mansion, once a symbol of untouchable wealth, was now besieged by paparazzi, their flashing cameras a relentless assault on its privacy. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension, a suffocating blend of fear and denial. Elena, clutching Maya and Leo tightly, watched the news coverage on a small, forgotten television in the servants' quarters. The children, usually vibrant and full of life, were subdued, their eyes wide with a dawning understanding of the storm raging around them. Maya clung to her worn teddy bear, its fur matted from countless cuddles, a silent comfort in the chaos. Leo, ever observant, absorbed the swirling accusations, his small brow furrowed in concentration. "Mommy, are they saying we're liars?" Maya whispered, her voice barely audible above the cacophony of the television. Elena knelt, pulling her daughter close. "No, sweetheart," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "They're saying things they don't understand. We're telling the truth." She looked at Leo, his eyes filled with a quiet sadness that mirrored her own. The weight of the public scrutiny, the accusations hurled by the press, pressed down on her, a heavy cloak of fear. But she knew she couldn't falter. Not for her children. Arthur Beaumont, his face contorted in a mask of fury, paced his study. The mahogany desk, usually pristine, was littered with crumpled papers, testament to his frantic attempts to control the damage. He slammed his fist on the surface, the sharp crack echoing through the silent room. "They'll pay for this," he muttered, his voice a low growl laced with barely suppressed rage. The luxury surrounding him, the Persian rugs, the antique furniture, the priceless artwork, seemed to mock his crumbling control. His carefully constructed world was unraveling, and the panic gnawed at him, a relentless predator tearing at his composure. The carefully cultivated image he'd spent a lifetime building was shattering, brick by painful brick. The opulent facade could not mask the truth any longer. The truth that was now public knowledge. The truth that threatened everything he held dear. The courtroom was a suffocating blend of hushed whispers and the sharp click of cameras. Elena, dressed in a borrowed suit that felt both stiff and inadequate, sat beside Maya and Leo. Maya, clutching her teddy bear, fidgeted. Leo stared straight ahead, his small face a mask of quiet intensity. The air hung heavy with the scent of expensive perfume and nervous sweat. Arthur Beaumont, a monument to controlled rage in his tailored suit, sat across the room, his gaze fixed on Elena, a silent accusation radiating from him. "Mrs. Hernandez," the lawyer's voice cut through the silence, "can you reiterate your claims concerning the paternity of your children?" Elena swallowed, her throat dry. The fluorescent lights seemed to amplify the tremor in her hands. "Yes, the DNA evidence irrefutably proves that Leo and Maya are the children of Arthur Beaumont." Her voice, though shaky, held a strength that surprised even herself. The judge's sharp gaze was upon her. The weight of the courtroom, the weight of the Beaumont's legacy, pressed down. But in Maya's wide eyes and Leo's unwavering stare, she found her courage. She saw not fear, but a quiet dignity that mirrored her own resolve. A murmur rippled through the courtroom as Arthur's lawyer launched into a blistering cross-examination, questioning Elena's motives, her character, her very sanity. Each barbed question felt like a personal attack, a cruel attempt to dismantle the truth she held so dearly. Maya whimpered softly, burying her face in her bear. Leo's hand reached out to comfort her, a small gesture of sibling solace in the heart of the storm. The tension in the courtroom was almost palpable, a living entity. Even the air itself seemed to vibrate with the unspoken accusations and the unspoken truths. Elena held her ground. Her voice, though strained, remained firm. She recounted her years of service, her quiet devotion, the unspoken love that had blossomed within the mansion walls. Her narrative painted a picture of silent sacrifices and deep-seated loyalty, painting a stark contrast to Arthur's image of unyielding power. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the courtroom floor as Elena's testimony continued. She spoke of the hidden box, the old letters, the growing suspicion that had led her to seek answers, to uncover a truth that would shatter a dynasty. Her words were a testament to her strength, a testament to the love that bound her to her children, a love that had given her the courage to fight for her family's future. The silent support from Maya and Leo, their quiet dignity, bolstered her strength, proving that family bonds could transcend even the wealthiest of walls. The news exploded. Headlines screamed betrayal, scandal, and shattered illusions. Photographs of Elena, Maya, and Leo, a stark contrast to the usual glossy images of the Beaumont family, adorned every newspaper and website. The opulent mansion, once a symbol of untouchable privilege, now felt like a gilded cage under the intense scrutiny of the public eye. Elena, clutching a lukewarm cup of tea, felt the tremor in her hand. The warmth did little to soothe the icy dread that clung to her. Maya, usually so vibrant, was unusually quiet, her eyes wide and fearful. Leo, ever the stoic one, seemed to have aged years in the past few days. The television blared in the background, a cacophony of accusations and speculation. "Mommy?" Maya whispered, her voice barely audible above the noise. "Are they going to take us away?" Elena knelt, pulling her daughter close. The scent of Maya's hair, a familiar comfort, did little to stem the rising tide of fear. "No, sweetheart," she murmured, her voice cracking slightly. "We're a family. No one can take that away from us." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. The legal battles had begun. Each day a new assault on her already fragile defenses. Arthur, fueled by rage and a desperate need to control the narrative, employed the city's most ruthless lawyers. Their attacks were relentless, aiming not just to discredit Elena but to destroy her. They're saying I'm a liar," Leo said, his voice small but unwavering. Elena looked at her son, seeing the strength in his usually quiet demeanor. "They're scared, Leo, scared of the truth. And sometimes, scared people lash out." That night, staring at the city lights from her small room, Elena felt the weight of the world on her shoulders. The luxury that surrounded her felt suffocating, a constant reminder of the power she was fighting against. Yet, in the sleeping forms of Maya and Leo nestled beside her, she found her strength, her purpose. Their innocent faces were a testament to the love that burned brighter than any scandal, any threat. This fight wasn't just for justice. It was for their future, for the chance to build a life where their truth mattered more than the Beaumont name. The fight would continue, even if it meant facing the storm alone. The relentless barrage of media coverage felt like a physical assault. Each headline a fresh wound. Elena's small room, usually a sanctuary, now felt like a prison cell. The scent of lavender from her comforting potpourri was overwhelmed by the metallic tang of fear. Maya clung to her, her small body trembling. Leo, surprisingly, was the one offering comfort, his hand resting reassuringly on his sister's shoulder. "They're just words, Maya," he whispered, his voice surprisingly steady. "But, Mommy," Maya sobbed, her face buried in Elena's shoulder. Elena stroked Maya's hair, the familiar gesture a lifeline in the maelstrom of uncertainty. "They're trying to hurt us, sweetheart," she said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "But they won't win. We have each other." That night, the flickering television screen cast long, distorted shadows across the room, showcasing Arthur Beaumont's carefully crafted denial, his face a mask of controlled fury. His words, polished and rehearsed, felt like a personal insult. Vivian Beaumont, a fragile butterfly caught in a hurricane, was a blur of distraught whispers and tear-stained cheeks on the screen. The sight of her unraveling further solidified Elena's resolve. The next morning, the first legal papers arrived, crisp white envelopes promising a protracted and brutal battle. The lawyer's letter felt cold and impersonal, its legalese a stark contrast to the warmth of the family huddled together on the worn couch. The legal fight was not just for property or money. It was for their dignity, for their very existence. The fear, once a simmering undercurrent, had become a relentless tide threatening to consume them. But in its wake, something equally powerful was surging. A fierce, unwavering love that bound them together. The mahogany doors of the Beaumont family's courtroom-appointed lawyer's office felt heavy, oppressive. The air, thick with the scent of expensive leather and simmering tension, pressed down on Elena. Across the polished table, Mr. Finch, a man whose smile never quite reached his cold, calculating eyes, laid out the terms of Arthur Beaumont's countersuit. His words, precise and legalistic, felt like icy shards against her skin. Maya, clutching Elena's hand, squeezed tightly. Leo, ever the stoic, observed the proceedings with an intensity that belied his age. "They're trying to bankrupt us, Elena," Finch said, his voice a low, smooth purr. "They claim you stole documents, that your DNA testing was fraudulent." The accusation hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Elena felt a surge of anger, a hot, righteous fury that threatened to consume her. "Lies," she breathed, her voice trembling slightly, but her gaze unwavering. "They're trying to silence us, to bury the truth." Finch's smile tightened. "The truth, as they see it, is far different." He tapped a file on the table. "They have a team of investigators digging into your past, Elena. Your finances, your history, everything." The weight of his words pressed down on Elena, a physical burden. She glanced at her children, their small faces mirroring her fear, their eyes wide with a mixture of apprehension and unwavering trust in her. This wasn't just about money. It was about their future, their security, their very identity. The fight, once a battle for recognition, had become a desperate struggle for survival. The lavender scent of her home felt miles away, replaced by the sterile, almost clinical smell of the lawyer's office. A smell that spoke of calculated strategy and cold, hard facts. The fight was far from over, and the cost of this war was far higher than anyone could have anticipated. The children's grip on her hand tightened, a silent pledge of unwavering support in this treacherous storm. Elena took a deep breath, steeling herself. They would fight. They would survive. They would win. The courtroom's sterile air hung heavy with the scent of antiseptic and hushed whispers. Elena, clutching a worn tissue, felt the tremor in her hands. Across the room, Arthur Beaumont, his face a mask of controlled fury, watched her with cold intensity. His tailored suit, usually a symbol of power, now seemed to amplify his simmering rage. Maya, her small hand hidden in Elena's, squeezed it reassuringly, her eyes reflecting the fear that mirrored Elena's own. Leo, quiet and observant, sat beside her, a miniature replica of his stoic mother. The judge's gavel fell, a sharp crack that sliced through the tense silence. "Ms. Hernandez," the judge's voice boomed, "the court awaits your testimony." Elena rose, her legs unsteady beneath her. The spotlight felt like a physical weight, focusing the entire courtroom's attention on her. The murmur of hushed conversation ceased, leaving only the rhythmic tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. She took a deep breath, the scent of dust and old wood momentarily grounding her. "My testimony," she began, her voice clear despite the tremor, "is about truth, about a truth Mr. Beaumont has spent a lifetime burying." She spoke of the dusty box, the faded photographs, the poignant letters detailing a secret love affair. Her voice filled with a quiet dignity, building a case not just with facts, but with emotion. She spoke of the love she felt for her children, a love that transcended class, privilege, and lies. She described the moment she saw Maya and Leo's faces in the old photos, the impossible resemblance striking her with the force of a physical blow. "This isn't about money," Elena said, her eyes locking with Arthur's. "It's about family, about a family he tried to erase, a family he abandoned." She paused, tears welling up in her eyes but refusing to fall. She saw Maya's hand tighten in hers again, a silent promise of support, and Leo's quiet intensity shifting to a mixture of worry and pride. Arthur remained impassive, but the barely perceptible twitch of his jaw betrayed his inner turmoil. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. Elena's testimony, raw and emotionally charged, was a carefully constructed masterpiece, a potent weapon shattering Arthur's carefully crafted facade of innocence. This was more than a legal battle. It was a fight for the very soul of her family, a battle for love and truth. The next few hours would determine not only the outcome of the case, but the future of Elena and her children. The weight of the world rested upon her shoulders. Yet in that moment of vulnerability and truth, she discovered a strength she never knew she possessed. The courtroom buzzed, a hive of hushed whispers and rustling papers. Elena, her throat suddenly dry, felt Maya's small hand gripping hers with surprising strength. Leo, ever observant, sat silently, his dark eyes mirroring the storm brewing within her. The scent of old wood and polished mahogany battled with the sterile antiseptic tang of the air, a bizarre juxtaposition of the old and new worlds colliding in this sterile arena. Arthur Beaumont, a picture of controlled rage, watched from across the room, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the turmoil roiling beneath his surface. His lips, usually a thin, precise line, were pressed together, a testament to his barely contained fury. Vivian, frail and pale, sat beside him, her gaze flitting nervously around the room, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her fragility seemed to amplify the gravity of the situation. Ms. Hernandez, the judge's voice, amplified by the microphone, cut through the tense silence. Your testimony is vital. Proceed. Elena swallowed, the lump in her throat a physical manifestation of her fear. But then, looking at Maya and Leo, their faces a mixture of anxiety and unwavering support, she found a wellspring of strength she hadn't known she possessed. My testimony, she began, her voice surprisingly steady, concerns the truth, a truth Mr. Beaumont has spent a lifetime concealing. Her voice, initially hesitant, grew stronger with each word. She described the dusty box, the faded photographs of young Arthur, a laughing woman with eyes strikingly similar to Maya's, the poignant letters revealing a love affair buried under layers of wealth and privilege. She detailed the DNA evidence, the undeniable connection, the scientific proof of a family bond Mr. Beaumont had ruthlessly tried to erase. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Arthur's controlled facade began to crack, a muscle twitching in his jaw, his eyes momentarily losing their icy composure. The weight of his deception seemed to press down on him, visible even to the casual observer. Elena continued, her voice raw with emotion, but laced with a steely determination. This isn't about money, Your Honor, she stated, her gaze unwavering as she met Arthur's. It's about justice for my children, for a family he tried to destroy, a family he abandoned. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, a testament to the years of suppressed emotions finally unleashed. Yet, her voice remained firm, resolute. The silence in the courtroom was absolute, broken only by the steady tick of the grandfather clock, a relentless rhythm mirroring the pounding of her own heart. The battle for truth had begun. The courtroom air, thick with tension, tasted of stale coffee and fear. Elena felt Maya's hand tremble in hers. Leo, usually so expressive, was a statue of quiet anxiety, his gaze fixed on the mahogany judge's bench. Arthur Beaumont, his face a mask of barely controlled fury, glared at Elena, his eyes burning holes in her. The whispered accusations in the gallery felt like icy needles pricking her skin. The judge's gavel, sharp and decisive, cut through the suffocating silence. Mr. Beaumont, the judge's voice boomed, your counsel has presented a motion to dismiss. Your response, please. Arthur rose, his tailored suit somehow accentuating his rigid posture. His voice, usually smooth as polished granite, was tight with barely suppressed rage. The plaintiff's claims are baseless, Your Honor. A blatant attempt at extortion fueled by a disgruntled employee. His gaze swept across the room, lingering briefly on his children, their faces a mixture of apprehension and disdain. Elena's lawyer, a woman with sharp eyes and a steely resolve, countered immediately. This is not about money, Your Honor. It's about the truth, a truth buried beneath layers of wealth and privilege for decades. The DNA evidence is irrefutable. The witnesses are credible. This is about justice for two children whose lives have been irrevocably affected by Mr. Beaumont's actions. The legal battle raged on, a clash of wills, of truth and deception, played out in the sterile, echoing space. Each legal maneuver, each objection, chipped away at the carefully constructed facade of the Beaumont dynasty. The smell of fear mixed with the scent of expensive perfume, the cacophony of legal jargon, a stark contrast to the quiet desperation Elena felt. The judge, after a long, thoughtful pause, looked at Elena. Ms. Hernandez, he said, his voice less forceful this time, more laced with a sense of weight. The court finds sufficient evidence to proceed. A wave of relief washed over Elena, a momentary reprieve in the relentless storm. But she knew this was only the beginning. The fight for her children's future, for their rightful place, had only just begun, and the battle would be far from over. The weight of the evidence, the pressure from Arthur's relentless legal assault, and the media circus surrounding the case threatened to crush her. Yet, she looked at Maya and Leo, their small hands clasped together, their eyes reflecting her own determination. She would fight for them, for the truth, for a future where they wouldn't just survive, but thrive. The opulent Beaumont mansion, usually a symbol of effortless grace, felt suffocating. Sunlight, usually streaming through the stained glass windows, cast long, menacing shadows. Inside, the adult Beaumont children, fractured by the scandal, held a tense family meeting. Isabel, the eldest, her face etched with a weary sadness, spoke first, her voice barely a whisper. "This is tearing us apart," she said, her gaze meeting her brother, Charles's, hardened expression. Charles, ever the pragmatist, remained stoic. "We need to protect the family name," he countered, his voice cold. "Elena is a threat." Their younger sister, Olivia, burst into tears. "But what if she's telling the truth?" she cried, her voice trembling. "What if Maya and Leo?" The unspoken accusation hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The room was thick with the scent of expensive lilies, a stark contrast to the raw emotion filling the space. Each of them felt the weight of the scandal, the crushing pressure of public scrutiny. Fear, guilt, and a simmering resentment towards their father battled within them. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the ticking of an antique grandfather clock, its rhythmic chime a cruel reminder of time relentlessly marching forward, leaving them trapped in a web of their own making. Isabel, gazing at her siblings' conflicted faces, felt a pang of hope. Could this shared pain, this vulnerability, finally break through the wall of denial and pave the way for something different? The possibility felt fragile, like a butterfly's wing, but it was there, fluttering in the suffocating atmosphere of the Beaumont family's implosion. The decision each sibling would make, to cling to the past or embrace the truth, would determine not only the fate of the family but their own individual destinies. The courtroom hummed, a hive of hushed whispers and rustling papers. Elena, her hand resting on Maya's tightly gripped one, felt Leo's small hand tucked into hers. The air, thick with the scent of expensive perfume and nervous sweat, felt heavy on her chest. Arthur Beaumont, his face a mask of controlled fury, sat rigidly at the defense table. His gaze, cold and calculating, swept across the room, briefly lingering on Elena before snapping back to his lawyer. The lawyer, a seasoned shark in a tailored suit, launched into a blistering cross-examination. His words, sharp and precise, aimed to dismantle Elena's testimony, portraying her as a vengeful opportunist, a gold-digging housekeeper driven by greed. Each carefully chosen phrase felt like a blow, aimed at shattering the carefully constructed narrative Elena had built. Maya, her eyes wide and frightened, squeezed Elena's hand harder. Leo, usually so boisterous, remained silent, his small body trembling slightly. Elena, however, met the lawyer's assault with a quiet strength, her gaze unwavering. The weight of the past, the years of hidden longing, and the fear for her children's future fueled her. "You claim you were unaware of Mr. Beaumont's true intentions," the lawyer sneered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Yet you kept silent for years, benefiting from his generosity." "My silence was born of fear," Elena responded, her voice clear and steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Fear for my children, fear of losing the only life they'd ever known. But my love for them, my duty to protect them, finally surpassed my fear." Her voice cracked slightly, but she pressed on. "The truth, Mr. Thompson, is more precious than any amount of money." A hushed silence fell over the courtroom as Elena's words hung in the air, imbued with the weight of years of unspoken truth. The judge, his face impassive, tapped his pen against the mahogany bench, a sound that echoed in the tense silence. The air crackled with anticipation, the turning point of the trial hanging precariously in the balance. The truth, fragile and vulnerable, yet powerfully present, faced the cold machinations of wealth and power. The outcome, for Elena and her children, hung by a thread. Outside, The relentless city life continued, oblivious to the battle playing out within those four walls. The fate of a family, the triumph of truth over deception. It all rested here, in this tense, charged courtroom. The courtroom's sterile air hung heavy with unspoken accusations. Sunlight, fractured by the tall windows, painted shifting bars across Arthur Beaumont's face, highlighting the grim set of his jaw. His tailored suit, usually a symbol of power, now seemed to amplify his simmering rage. Elena, clutching Maya and Leo's hands, felt the tremor in their small bodies mirror her own anxiety. The lawyer's relentless attack continued, each question a carefully aimed dart, designed to pierce her carefully constructed defense. "So, Ms. Ramirez," the lawyer sneered, his voice a venomous whisper amplified by the courtroom's acoustics, "you admit to secretly collecting Mr. Beaumont's DNA, a flagrant violation of privacy?" Elena swallowed, the dryness in her throat a physical manifestation of her fear. "I did what I had to," she replied, her voice trembling but firm. "To protect my children." Maya squeezed her hand, her silent plea for reassurance palpable. The judge, a stoic figure seemingly carved from granite, leaned forward. "Ms. Ramirez, can you explain the significance of these DNA results?" Elena took a deep breath, gathering the strength from the small hands in hers. She met the judge's gaze, her own eyes filled with a fierce determination that belied her fragile appearance. "The results prove what I suspected all along," she said, her voice clear and resonant. "That my children, they are related to the Beaumont family." A ripple of gasps ran through the courtroom. Whispers, like startled birds, filled the hushed silence. The tension was suffocating. The air thick with unspoken accusations, the weight of years of secrets pressing down. Arthur's controlled fury threatened to explode, his knuckles white as he clenched his fists. Vivian, pale and trembling, watched from her seat, her eyes wide and lost. The fate of 3 lives, the unraveling of a dynasty, rested precariously on the scales of justice. The weight of it all threatened to crush Elena. Yet she stood, her gaze unwavering, her love for her children her unyielding shield. The hushed courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Sunlight, slanting through the high windows, illuminated dust motes dancing in the air, each a tiny, shimmering testament to the passage of time, the weight of secrets. Arthur Beaumont, his face a mask of controlled fury, shifted in his expensive chair, the crisp starch of his shirt contrasting harshly with the tremor in his hand. He glanced at Vivian, her eyes vacant, her fragile composure threatening to shatter. "And what?" the lawyer pressed, his voice a honed blade. "Does this supposed familial connection entail, Ms. Ramirez?" Elena swallowed, the taste of fear bitter on her tongue. Maya's small hand tightened in hers. Leo's eyes, usually bright with mischief, were wide with apprehension. She looked at them, her heart aching with a love so fierce it almost burned. "It means," she began, her voice shaking but steady, "that my children are, they are." The words caught in her throat. The weight of the revelation, the potential consequences, threatened to suffocate her. "They are what, Ms. Ramirez?" the lawyer prompted, his tone laced with barely concealed contempt. "They are Arthur's grandchildren," she finally whispered, the confession hanging heavy in the air, thick and suffocating like the silence that followed. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. The whispers started again, a low murmur like the rustling of anxious leaves. One of the Beaumont children, a young woman named Catherine, shifted in her seat. Her initial hostility seemed to soften, replaced by a flicker of something akin to understanding. Her brother, however, remained impassive, his face a mask of icy disdain. The scene was a whirlwind of emotions, a clash of privilege and desperation, of truth and lies. The air crackled with the unspoken tension, a palpable energy that hung heavy between Elena and the imposing figure of Arthur Beaumont. The judge, still and observant, watched the scene unfold before him, his expression unreadable. The fate of these lives, these families, hung in the balance, suspended in the dusty silence of the courtroom. waiting for the scales of justice to finally tip. The judge's gavel, a sharp crack in the suffocating silence, jolted Elena back to reality. The courtroom, a gilded cage of polished wood and hushed whispers, felt colder than ever. The sunlight, once a fragile hope, now seemed to mock her with its indifference. Maya, clutching a worn wooden doll, trembled beside her. Leo, usually a whirlwind of energy, was oddly still, his gaze fixed on the floor. "The defense rests," Arthur's lawyer announced, his voice smooth as polished marble, a stark contrast to the turmoil within Elena. The following days were a blur of legal maneuvering and calculated delays. Arthur, a master of manipulation, used his influence to sow seeds of doubt, his whispers slithering through the corridors of power. The media, initially sympathetic, began to shift, their headlines questioning Elena's motives, casting doubt on her credibility. The tide was turning. One evening, huddled in their small, sparsely furnished apartment, the weight of it all crashed down on Elena. The fear, a constant companion, morphed into something deeper, a chilling despair. "Mama," Maya whispered, her voice trembling. "Will they take us away?" Elena knelt, pulling her daughter close, the rough fabric of her worn dress a poor comfort against the chill of fear that gripped them both. "Never," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "Never." But even as she spoke the words, a seed of doubt sprouted within her. The legal setbacks, the relentless pressure, the mounting isolation. It was beginning to feel like a losing battle. Leo, sensing his mother's distress, climbed onto her lap, his small arms wrapping around her neck. His silent affection was a lifeline, a reminder of the unwavering bond that anchored her. His presence, a small spark of warmth amidst the enveloping darkness, was the only thing that stopped the despair from consuming her completely. That night, Elena stared out at the city lights, a million tiny pinpricks of illumination against the vast, indifferent sky. The city that once represented opportunity now felt like a hostile fortress, its walls closing in, threatening to crush them. But amidst the fear, a stubborn ember of defiance glowed within her. She would not break, not for her children, not for the truth. The fight, however daunting, was far from over. The battle for her children's future, and their place within the harsh light of truth, had just begun. The courtroom's polished mahogany gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, reflecting the starkness of Elena's situation. The air hung thick with unspoken accusations, a suffocating blanket woven from doubt and suspicion. Maya, clutching her doll tighter, whimpered softly. Leo, unusually quiet, stared at the floor, his small fists clenched. Elena felt the weight of their fear, a physical pressure on her chest. She met the judge's gaze, a steely glint in his eyes that mirrored the coldness of the room. "Your Honor," Arthur's lawyer, a sleek predator in a tailored suit, purred. "We have presented irrefutable evidence questioning the validity of Ms. Ramirez's claims." His words, carefully chosen daggers, pierced Elena. She felt a cold dread creep up her spine, the familiar icy grip of fear tightening around her heart. She glanced at her children, their faces pale and drawn, reflecting her own growing despair. The following weeks were a blur of legal battles, each setback chipping away at her resolve. Arthur, a master manipulator, used his wealth and influence to discredit her, his actions a stark testament to his ruthlessness. Newspapers splashed headlines filled with innuendo and doubt, turning public opinion against her. The once supportive journalists now questioned her integrity, their words like poisoned arrows aimed at her heart. One evening, huddled in their tiny apartment, the city's cacophony a constant reminder of their isolation, Maya's question echoed in the silence. "Mama, will they take us away?" Elena's heart ached. She pulled her daughter close, whispering assurances that felt hollow even to her own ears. The fear that had been a constant companion now gnawed at her, a relentless beast threatening to consume her entirely. Leo, sensing her despair, climbed onto her lap, his small body a source of comfort against the encroaching darkness. His presence, a beacon of unwavering love, was all that kept her from succumbing to despair. Looking out at the city lights, a million pinpricks of artificial brilliance, Elena felt the weight of their isolation, the crushing pressure of their precarious situation. Yet, amidst the fear, a spark of defiance flickered within her. A fierce determination hardened her gaze. She would not surrender, not for her children, not for the truth. The fight was far from over. It had just begun. Their battle for justice, for recognition, for a future free from the shadows of Arthur's wealth and power, was only just starting. The sterile scent of antiseptic hung heavy in the air, a stark contrast to the opulent perfume Elena usually associated with the Beaumont mansion. She sat across from a lawyer, his face impassive, a stark white folder resting on the polished mahogany desk. He cleared his throat, the sound brittle in the silence. The appeal. It's been denied. Elena felt a cold dread seep into her bones, the words a physical blow. Maya, nestled beside her, squeezed her hand, her small fingers surprisingly strong. Leo, ever observant, watched with wide, frightened eyes. But the evidence, Elena managed, her voice trembling. The DNA, the lawyer sighed, a weary sound devoid of sympathy. The court found inconsistencies. Mr. Beaumont's resources, they were persuasive. He avoided her gaze, the implication hanging heavy in the air. Elena felt a surge of bitter anger, a burning resentment that threatened to consume her. This wasn't just about money. It was about justice, about her children's future. Leaving the lawyer's office, the city seemed to press in on Elena, a suffocating weight of indifference. The sharp bite of the wind whipped at her face, a cruel echo of the coldness she felt inside. Maya shivered, her small body trembling. "Mama," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the city's clamor. "Are we going to be okay?" Elena knelt, pulling her daughter close. The warmth of Maya's body against hers was a small comfort against the overwhelming despair. "Yes, Mija," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "We will be. We always are." But even as she spoke the words, a tremor of doubt shook her own conviction. The weight of their fight, the endless uphill battle against Arthur's wealth and influence, seemed insurmountable. Yet, as she looked at her children, their faces etched with worry, she found a new wellspring of strength. Their love, their unwavering belief in her, fueled her resolve. This wasn't just a fight for justice. It was a fight for their future, their dignity, their very survival, and she would not fail them. The biting wind whipped at Elena's face as she navigated the labyrinthine streets, the city a cold, indifferent giant. Maya's small hand, nestled tightly in hers, offered a fragile warmth against the encroaching chill. Leo, silent but observant, trailed behind, his eyes mirroring the storm raging inside Elena. The lawyer's words echoed, a cruel mockery of justice. Denied. The word clawed at her, a physical wound. Reaching their cramped apartment, the stark contrast to the Beaumont mansion was a painful reminder of their precarious situation. The air hung heavy with unspoken fear, the silence punctuated only by the rhythmic tick of a cheap clock. Maya huddled under a threadbare blanket, her small frame shivering. "Mama," Maya whispered, her voice barely a breath. "Will they take us away?" Elena knelt, pulling her daughter close, the rough fabric of the blanket scratching her cheek. "No, Mija, never." The words, though fiercely intended, felt fragile, even to her own ears. Doubt, a venomous serpent, coiled in her heart. Arthur Beaumont's power felt limitless, a crushing weight threatening to suffocate them. Leo, ever the perceptive one, approached cautiously, his eyes searching hers. He offered a small, worn toy car, a relic from a happier time, a stark contrast to their current reality. The simple gesture, born from a child's innocent desire to comfort, pierced Elena's defenses, unleashing a torrent of unshed tears. She held him close, the warmth of his small body a lifeline in the swirling tempest of fear and uncertainty. "We'll fight," she vowed, her voice raw with emotion, more to convince herself than her children. We'll fight for every inch, for every breath, for our future. The image of Arthur Beaumont's smug face, his eyes gleaming with cold calculation, flashed through her mind. He underestimated them, she realized. He saw only a housekeeper and her children. He didn't see the unwavering bond that held them together, a force stronger than his wealth, more resilient than his power. This fight wasn't just about survival. It was about proving their worth, reclaiming their dignity, and carving out their own place in a world that had tried to erase them. The fight was far from over, and it was a fight they would face together. The flickering gaslight cast long shadows across the cramped apartment, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the air. The scent of stale bread and simmering lentils hung heavy, a stark contrast to the perfumed opulence of the Beaumont mansion. Maya, curled on the worn sofa, clutched a ragged doll, her eyes wide and haunted. Leo, perched on the windowsill, traced patterns on the condensation with a trembling finger. The silence, thick with unspoken fear, was broken only by the rhythmic drip of a leaky faucet. Elena, her face etched with exhaustion, sat at the small kitchen table, a crumpled newspaper clutched in her hand. The headline screamed, "Beaumont Scandal Deepens. Housekeeper's Claims Rejected." Her hands trembled as she reread the article, each word a fresh stab of disappointment. The lawyer's words echoed in her ears, a cruel dismissal. "Mama," Maya whispered, her voice choked with unshed tears. "Are we going back?" Elena's heart ached. The question, so innocent, cut deeper than any legal setback. She longed to cradle her daughter in her arms, to promise her safety, a future free from fear. But the hollow ache in her chest mirrored the emptiness in her promise. She could offer only a strained smile. "No, Mija," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "Not yet." Leo, ever observant, slid off the windowsill and approached her silently. He placed a small, smooth stone in her hand, a treasure he'd found during their clandestine escape from the mansion. The simple gesture, filled with unspoken understanding, was more comforting than any words. "Don't worry, Mama," Leo whispered, his voice surprisingly firm for a child his age. "We'll find a way." His words, small and fragile, resonated with an unexpected strength. They were words not of naive hope, but of a child determined to help his mother. Tears welled in Elena's eyes. This was not just about her own survival. It was about their future, their dignity. The cold indifference of the justice system, the blatant manipulation of Arthur Beaumont, fueled a fire within her, a righteous anger that surpassed her fear. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning, and she would fight for her children, for the truth, for the future she yearned to give them. The fight was for her children's right to exist, to be seen, to be accepted. And that was a battle that even the wealth and power of the Beaumont dynasty could not win. The biting November wind whipped through the alley, stinging Elena's cheeks as she huddled deeper into her threadbare coat. The flickering neon sign of a nearby bar cast a sickly yellow glow on the damp pavement. Across from her, a worn wooden door, the entrance to a dilapidated building, seemed to breathe a promise of refuge. Inside, a journalist, a woman named Sarah Jenkins, waited. Sarah, with her sharp eyes and an unwavering gaze, had become an unexpected ally, a beacon in the storm of Arthur Beaumont's machinations. "They're digging deeper," Sarah said, her voice low, a stark contrast to the city's cacophony. The aroma of stale coffee and cigarette smoke hung heavy in the air. She pushed a file across the scarred table towards Elena. More evidence of financial irregularities. Enough to put Arthur away for a good long time. Elena's heart thudded against her ribs. Hope, a fragile butterfly, fluttered in her chest. This wasn't just about clearing her name. It was about securing Maya and Leo's future, shielding them from the lingering shadow of the Beaumont family's wrath. But the children? Elena whispered, her voice hoarse. The weight of the past few months, the constant fear, the relentless legal battles, had etched lines of worry onto her face. Fear gnawed at the edges of her hope. Sarah met her gaze, her expression softening. "We'll protect them," This is about more than just justice for you, Elena. It's about exposing a corrupt system, showing the world that wealth can't buy impunity. That night, huddled together in their cramped apartment, Elena shared the news with Maya and Leo. The children, usually subdued by the ordeal, reacted with an unexpected burst of excitement. Leo, his eyes shining with a fierce determination, clenched his small fist. "We're going to win, Mama," he declared. Maya, usually quieter, nodded, a small, determined smile gracing her lips. The weight of the legal battle still pressed upon them. But for the first time in months, a flicker of hope, fueled by Sarah's dedication and the children's unwavering belief, pushed back against the darkness. The scent of hope, faint but persistent, mingled with the aroma of lentils simmering on the stove, a quiet promise of a brighter tomorrow. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, Elena felt a renewed strength coursing through her veins, a strength born not of wealth or power, but of unwavering maternal love. The chipped paint of Sarah Jenkins's desk seemed to mirror the cracks in Elena's own spirit. The stale air hung heavy with the scent of old paper and desperation. Sarah, her face etched with concern, slid another file across the worn surface. "This is from a former Beaumont accountant," she said, her voice a low hum against the city's relentless rhythm. "Details of offshore accounts, shell corporations, enough to bury Arthur." Elena stared at the documents, the crisp white paper a stark contrast to the turmoil within her. The children, nestled on a worn sofa in the corner, played quietly, their small hands constructing a fragile castle out of building blocks. Their usual vibrant energy was dimmed, replaced by a cautious stillness. Leo, ever watchful, glanced up at his mother, his large brown eyes mirroring her apprehension. "It's a risk, Sarah," Elena murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. The thought of facing Arthur's wrath, of further endangering her children, sent a shiver down her spine. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her, a crushing burden. The fear wasn't for herself, but for Maya and Leo. Sarah's gaze softened. "It's a calculated risk, Elena. We have more than just financial irregularities now. We're building a case that exposes his pattern of deceit, his systematic abuse of power." She paused, her eyes meeting Elena's. "This isn't just about money. This is about justice, about protecting your children from a man who would use his wealth to silence the truth." The words resonated deep within Elena. She looked at her children, their innocent faces a potent reminder of why she couldn't back down. A surge of fierce determination replaced the gnawing fear. The scent of hope, once faint, now blossomed stronger, fueled by Sarah's conviction and her own unwavering love. "Let's do it," Elena said, her voice firm, a tremor of newfound strength shaking her slightly. The weight of the decision, though heavy, felt different now. It wasn't just survival. It was a fight for a future where Maya and Leo wouldn't be haunted by the shadow of Arthur Beaumont's lies. The fight for justice had become a fight for their future, and she would not yield. The chipped paint of Sarah Jenkins's desk seemed to mirror the cracks in Elena's own spirit. Sunlight, filtering through the grimy office window, illuminated dust motes dancing in the stale air, thick with the scent of old paper and desperation. Sarah, her face etched with worry lines that spoke of years spent fighting unseen battles, pushed another file across the worn surface. "This is from a former Beaumont accountant," she said, her voice a low hum against the city's relentless rhythm. "Details of offshore accounts, shell corporations, enough to bury Arthur." Elena traced a finger along the crisp white paper, the cool texture a stark contrast to the turmoil burning within her. Maya and Leo, nestled on a worn sofa in the corner, built a precarious castle of brightly colored blocks, their usual vibrant energy muted by the weight of unspoken anxieties. Leo, ever watchful, glanced up at his mother, his large brown eyes reflecting her apprehension. His small hand tightened on a tiny plastic brick. "It's a risk, Sarah," Elena murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. The thought of facing Arthur's wrath, of further endangering her children, sent a shiver down her spine. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her, a crushing burden. The fear wasn't for herself, but for the fragile innocence reflected in her children's eyes. Sarah's gaze softened, understanding flickering in her weary eyes. It's a calculated risk, Elena. We have more than just financial irregularities now. We're building a case that exposes his pattern of deceit, his systematic abuse of power. She paused, her eyes meeting Elena's, a spark of fierce determination igniting in their depths. This isn't just about money. This is about justice, about protecting your children from a man who would use his wealth to silence the truth. The words resonated deep within Elena, striking a chord of buried defiance. She looked at her children, their innocent faces a potent reminder of why she wouldn't back down. A surge of fierce determination, born of love and desperation, replaced the gnawing fear. The scent of hope, once faint and distant, bloomed stronger, fueled by Sarah's unwavering conviction and her own unwavering love. "Let's do it," Elena said, her voice firm, a tremor of newfound strength shaking her slightly. The weight of the decision, though heavy, felt different now. It wasn't just survival. It was a fight for a future where Maya and Leo wouldn't be haunted by the shadow of Arthur Beaumont's lies. The fight for justice had become a fight for their future. And in their wide, trusting eyes, she found the strength to face whatever lay ahead. The air, still thick with the scent of old paper, seemed to lighten, replaced by a fragile whisper of hope. The chipped paint of Sarah's desk felt cold under Elena's fingers. The scent of old coffee and desperation clung to the air, a stark contrast to the opulent aromas of the Beaumont mansion. Outside, the city thrummed, a relentless pulse against the quiet intensity of the small office. Maya, perched on Sarah's knee, traced the lines on a legal document with a tiny finger, her normally bright eyes clouded with a worry that mirrored her mother's. Leo, quieter, clung to Elena's hand, his small fingers squeezing tight. This changes everything," Elena whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She held the newly obtained documents, detailing Arthur's intricate web of deceit, offshore accounts, falsified records, enough to unravel his carefully constructed empire. The weight of it settled on her chest, a physical burden. Sarah, her eyes filled with a weary compassion, placed a comforting hand on Elena's arm. "It's not just about exposing him, Elena. It's about securing your children's future, about ensuring they inherit nothing tainted by his lies." A tear escaped Elena's eye, tracing a path through the dust motes dancing in the afternoon sunlight. "But the risk, Arthur is powerful. He'll stop at nothing." Leo, sensing his mother's fear, looked up, his large brown eyes questioning. "Mama, will he hurt us?" Elena knelt, pulling her son into a fierce hug, the scent of his soft hair a comfort against the storm brewing inside her. "No, mi amor. Mama will protect you. Always." The words, meant to reassure him, felt fragile even to her own ears. The fear was real, a chilling premonition. But beneath it, a stronger current pulsed, a fierce determination fueled by her love for her children. "We'll proceed cautiously," Sarah assured her, her voice firm. "We'll leak the information strategically, focusing on the evidence that will cause the most damage, and build our case from there. We'll use his own greed against him. We have allies now, people who understand the gravity of this, who want to see justice done." Elena looked at Maya and Leo, their small faces reflecting the light of a setting sun, casting long shadows on the wall. The innocence in their eyes was a beacon, a guiding light in the darkness. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was a fight for their future, a future untainted by Arthur's shadow. It was a future that demanded bravery, even if it meant confronting the greatest fear of her life. "Let's do it," Elena said, her voice resonating with a newfound strength that surprised even herself. The fear remained, a constant companion, but it no longer held the same paralyzing grip. Hope, fragile as it was, had taken root, blossoming in the fertile soil of unwavering maternal love. The fight had begun. The chipped paint of Sarah's desk felt cold beneath Elena's trembling fingers. The scent of old coffee and impending doom hung heavy in the air, a stark contrast to the lavender and lilies that perpetually perfumed the Beaumont mansion. Outside, the city pulsed, a relentless rhythm against the quiet intensity of the small, dimly lit office. Maya, nestled on Sarah's knee, clutched a worn teddy bear, her usually bright eyes clouded with a worry that mirrored her mother's. Leo, silent and watchful, clung to Elena's hand, his small fingers bone-white against her own. This changes everything," Elena whispered, her voice barely audible above the frantic thump of her own heart. The documents, crisp and unforgiving in their detail, lay spread before her, Arthur's elaborate web of deceit laid bare. Offshore accounts, shell corporations, falsified records, enough to dismantle his carefully constructed empire and expose his years of corruption. The weight of it pressed down on her, a physical burden she could barely bear. Sarah, her face etched with a weary compassion, placed a comforting hand on Elena's arm. "It's not just about exposing him, Elena. It's about securing your children's future, ensuring they inherit nothing tainted by his lies." A single tear escaped Elena's eye, tracing a slow path through the dust motes dancing in the weak afternoon sunlight. "But the risk," Elena choked, her voice thick with a fear that clawed at her throat. "Arthur is powerful. He'll stop at nothing." Leo, sensing his mother's terror, looked up, his large brown eyes brimming with a child's raw fear. "Mama, will he hurt us?" Elena knelt, pulling her son into a fierce embrace, the scent of his soft hair a fragile comfort against the storm raging within her. "No, mi amor. Mama will protect you. Always." The words, meant to reassure him, felt hollow even to her own ears. The fear was palpable, a chilling premonition that sent shivers down her spine. Yet, beneath the icy grip of fear, a stronger current pulsed, a fierce determination fueled by her unwavering maternal love. "We'll proceed cautiously," Sarah assured her, her voice firm, a beacon in the encroaching darkness. "We'll leak the information strategically, focusing on the evidence that will cause the most damage, building our case methodically. We'll use his own greed against him. We have allies now, people who understand the gravity of this, who want to see justice done." Elena looked at Maya and Leo, their small faces illuminated by the fading sunlight, casting elongated shadows on the wall. The innocence in their eyes was a lifeline, a beacon guiding her through the darkness. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was a fight for their future, a future untainted by Arthur's shadow. It was a future that demanded bravery, even if it meant confronting the greatest fear of her life. The weight of her decision settled upon her shoulders, a heavy cloak she would wear with steely resolve. "Let's do it," Elena said. Her voice, though trembling, resonated with a newfound strength that surprised even herself. The fear remained, a constant companion, but its paralyzing grip had loosened. Hope, fragile yet tenacious, had taken root, blossoming in the fertile soil of unwavering maternal love. The fight, long and arduous, had begun. The sterile scent of antiseptic hung heavy in the air, a stark contrast to the opulent floral arrangements that usually graced the Beaumont mansion. Elena sat across from a stern-faced lawyer, Mr. Davies, his gaze unwavering. Maya, perched on Elena's lap, nervously chewed on a thumbnail, while Leo, unusually quiet, clutched a small, worn toy car. The lawyer's words, precise and legalistic, painted a bleak picture. Their case was faltering. Arthur Beaumont's influence, his web of lawyers and powerful connections, was proving insurmountable. "They're discrediting the DNA evidence," Davies stated, his voice devoid of emotion. "They're claiming contamination, procedural errors, anything to cast doubt." He pushed a file across the polished mahogany table, the papers crisp and unforgiving. "And the media, they're turning against you, Elena. The narrative is shifting." Elena felt a cold dread creep up her spine. The weight of it pressed down on her, a physical burden. Her carefully constructed hope, fragile as a butterfly's wing, fluttered dangerously close to extinction. The city lights outside blurred through her tear-filled eyes. Maya's small hand squeezed hers, a silent gesture of unwavering support. "What about the financial records?" Elena asked, her voice trembling slightly but holding a core of steel. "The offshore accounts, the shell corporations." Davies sighed, rubbing his weary eyes. "They're contesting those too. They're claiming legitimate business dealings. It's a battle we may not win." He paused, his gaze softening slightly. "But we still have some cards to play. We need to find more concrete evidence, something irrefutable." A sudden, sharp cry from Maya broke the tense silence. She clutched at Elena's arm, her face pale, whispering, "Mama, I'm scared." Leo, his eyes wide with fear, echoed his sister's sentiment. The sight of her children's fear broke the dam. Tears streamed down Elena's face, blurring her vision. She pulled them both close, their small bodies trembling against hers. The lawyer's words, once a crushing weight, seemed less significant now. The fear was still there, a gnawing beast in her gut, but beneath it lay a fierce, burning ember of maternal protectiveness. This wasn't just about justice or money. It was about her children's safety, their future. And that future, she vowed, would not be determined by Arthur Beaumont's wealth or power. It would be built on the unshakable foundation of her love. This battle was far from over. The fight for her children's future had only just begun. The weight of the lawyer's words settled like a shroud. Elena's apartment, usually a haven of quiet comfort, felt suffocating. The city's relentless hum outside was a mocking counterpoint to the silence hanging heavy between her and her children. Maya, usually a whirlwind of energy, clung to her doll, her small fingers white around its fabric dress. Leo, mimicking his sister's quietude, traced patterns on the worn wooden floorboards with his tiny finger. "Mama," Maya whispered, her voice barely audible, "will they take us away?" The question, so simple yet so devastating, pierced Elena's heart. Tears threatened to spill, but she blinked them back, forcing a smile that felt brittle and strained. "No, Mija," she murmured, tucking a stray strand of hair behind Maya's ear, the texture surprisingly coarse against her fingertip. "They won't. We'll fight this. Together." She squeezed Maya's hand, her own trembling slightly. The scent of brewing chamomile tea, a familiar comfort, did little to soothe the turmoil within. She looked at Leo, his gaze fixed on the floor, a silent reflection of her own anxieties. The fight, she realized, was no longer just about justice, but about survival, about shielding her children from the storm raging around them. A sharp rap on the door startled them. Elena's breath hitched. She smoothed her dress, trying to project an air of calm she didn't feel. Opening the door, she found a young woman, her face etched with determination, holding a worn leather satchel. "Ms. Ramirez?" the woman asked, her voice surprisingly gentle. "I'm Sarah Jenkins. A friend sent me." The satchel felt heavy in Elena's hands, the weight of unexpected hope. Inside, nestled amongst crumpled papers, was a small silver key. A key to a door she hadn't even known existed. A door, perhaps, to a future she hadn't dared to dream. The scent of old paper and faded ink filled the air, a potent scent of secrets and possibility. This was more than just a key. It was a lifeline. And for the first time since the crushing blow from Mr. Davies, a flicker of resolve, stronger than fear, ignited in Elena's heart. The fight, she decided, would continue. The silver key felt cold against Elena's palm, a stark contrast to the warmth of Maya's small hand nestled in hers. The apartment, though small, felt safer now, a haven against the storm brewing outside. Sarah Jenkins, the young woman who delivered the key, left a trail of quiet determination in her wake, the scent of her perfume. A subtle blend of lavender and something earthy lingered in the air. "What do you think it is, Mama?" Leo asked, his eyes wide with a mixture of apprehension and excitement. The worn key, a symbol of unknown possibilities, mirrored the uncertainty in their hearts. Elena traced the key's serrated edges, her thumb brushing against the cool metal. "I don't know, mi hijo," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. But we're going to find out. The weight of the situation pressed down on her. The looming legal battles, the betrayal, the constant fear for her children's future. Yet, this small, unexpected key ignited a fragile spark of hope. It was a sign, a whisper of a different path, a chance to fight back. That night, under the soft glow of a single lamp, Elena studied the accompanying papers. They were old, the ink faded, the paper brittle, carrying the scent of forgotten years and untold stories. Each page revealed fragments of information, connecting seemingly unrelated events. It was a meticulously compiled timeline, referencing old properties, forgotten accounts, and names long erased from the Beaumont family history. As Elena deciphered the cryptic messages, she felt a chill run down her spine. It was a roadmap, leading her to hidden truths about Arthur Beaumont and his past dealings, a truth that could shift the tide of the legal battle. Maya, nestled beside her, was asleep. Leo, however, watched his mother, his brow furrowed in concentration. He reached out, his small fingers brushing against the papers, the texture rough beneath his touch. "Mama," he whispered. "It's like a puzzle." Elena smiled, a genuine smile this time, warm and reassuring. "It is, mi amor," she agreed, her voice thick with emotion. "And together, we're going to solve it." The fear was still there, a shadow lurking in the corners of her heart, but it was overshadowed by a growing sense of purpose. This key, this puzzle, was not just a lifeline. It was a symbol of their resilience, their unwavering bond. This was their fight, and they would face it together, armed with hope and the unwavering love that bound them together, stronger than any wall, any lie, any wealth. The scent of chamomile tea hung faintly in the air, a promise of calm in the midst of the storm. The chipped paint of the courtroom bench felt rough against Elena's thighs. The air hung heavy with the scent of old wood and nervous sweat. Maya, clutching a worn teddy bear, squeezed Elena's hand, her knuckles white. Leo, unusually quiet, stared intently at the opposing counsel, his small face a mask of concentration. The lawyer, Mr. Harding, a shark in a tailored suit, was dissecting Elena's testimony, his voice a low, persistent drone designed to undermine her credibility. "So, Mrs. Ramirez," Harding sneered, "this evidence, this collection of documents, you admit they're years old, faded, and potentially fabricated?" His gaze swept across the courtroom, seeking allies amongst the hushed spectators. Elena met his gaze, her own eyes unwavering. The scent of lilies from a nearby vase did little to soothe the rising tide of anxiety within her. "They are old," she conceded, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "But they are real. Each detail, each date can be verified. They tell a story, Mr. Harding, a story Mr. Beaumont would rather keep buried." Maya shifted beside her, her small hand tightening its grip. The courtroom's chill seeped into Elena's bones, yet a fierce warmth ignited in her heart. The unwavering love for her children, the knowledge of the truth. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about their future, their right to a life free from the shadows cast by Arthur Beaumont's manipulations. Harding pressed on, his questions designed to sow doubt, to exploit the inherent vulnerability of her position. He questioned the chain of custody, the authenticity of the handwriting, the very existence of the documents themselves. Each question was a blow, yet with every carefully crafted answer, Elena felt a sense of purpose strengthening within her. A subtle shift in the room's atmosphere became palpable. A murmur rippled through the gallery, a tide turning ever so slightly. Sarah Jenkins, the young woman who'd given Elena the key, sat several rows back, her face pale but resolute. A small, almost imperceptible nod of support sent Elena's way. It was a silent affirmation, a tiny flicker of hope amidst the overwhelming darkness. The weight of the courtroom, the suffocating pressure of the legal battle, seemed to lessen, replaced by a quiet determination that burned brighter than any doubt. The fight wasn't over, but the tide was beginning to turn. The scent of impending victory, though faint, was in the air. The courtroom's stale air thickened with tension. Harding's relentless questioning had chipped away at Elena's composure, leaving her feeling exposed, raw. Yet, a quiet strength, fueled by the tiny hand gripping hers, kept her anchored. Maya's unwavering gaze, full of a child's innocent trust, was a lifeline. Leo, usually a whirlwind of energy, sat still, his brow furrowed in concentration, a miniature mirror of Elena's own determination. A hushed whisper rippled through the gallery. A subtle shift in the room's energy, a palpable change in the atmosphere. Elena felt it, a faint tremor of hope amidst the suffocating pressure. It emanated from the back, near the gallery's exit. She caught a glimpse of Sarah Jenkins, the former Beaumont employee, her face pale but resolute, a silent nod of encouragement that sent a wave of warmth through Elena's chilled heart. Harding paused, his smug expression faltering slightly. He glanced towards the judge, then back at Elena, the subtle shift in his demeanor almost imperceptible. His next question lacked its previous venom. "Mrs. Ramirez," he began, his voice softening, "you mentioned connections to other members of the Beaumont staff?" Elena straightened, her voice gaining strength. "Yes, several individuals, loyal and honest people who saw the truth and had the courage to speak it. People who were silenced, dismissed, their concerns ignored." She looked directly at Harding, her eyes blazing. "People like Sarah Jenkins, who risked everything to help me." The judge's gavel fell, sharp and decisive. The tension in the room crackled like static electricity. The implication hung heavy in the air. Harding's attempt to discredit Elena had inadvertently exposed the depth of the Beaumont family's manipulation. He had opened a door, revealing the cracks in Arthur's carefully constructed facade. The tide, it seemed, was turning irrevocably. The scent of lilies, once a subtle distraction, now felt like a symbol of the hope blossoming in the midst of the legal battle. The weight of the courtroom's judgment still pressed down, but the burden felt lighter, replaced by a quiet, unwavering resolve. The fight was far from over, but victory, once a distant hope, now felt tantalizingly close. The hushed courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Sunlight, slanting through the high windows, illuminated dust motes dancing in the air, each one a tiny, shimmering testament to the passage of time, the weight of secrets finally coming to light. From her seat, Elena watched as Catherine Beaumont, Arthur's eldest daughter, rose, her usually impeccable composure fractured. The crisp lines of her tailored suit couldn't disguise the tremor in her hands. A wave of nausea washed over Elena. Catherine, always aloof, was about to speak. Catherine's voice, when it came, was surprisingly soft, almost a whisper. "My father. He's not the man you think he is." Her eyes, usually cold and calculating, were filled with a raw, unsettling vulnerability. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Elena's heart pounded. This was it, the turning point. "For years," Catherine continued, her voice gaining strength, "I've witnessed his manipulations, his cruelty, his obsession with maintaining the Beaumont name, overshadowed everything else." She paused, taking a deep breath, her gaze sweeping across the courtroom, landing on Elena's face. "He silenced anyone who threatened his control, including his own family." A collective gasp rippled through the spectators. Maya, sensing the shift, squeezed Elena's hand tighter. Leo, his eyes wide, mirrored the shock rippling through the room. Elena felt a surge of both relief and trepidation. Catherine's testimony could shatter everything, yet it also carried a heavy risk. I've had my own doubts," Catherine admitted, her voice cracking, "but I was afraid of the repercussions of losing everything." She looked down at her hands, shame evident in her posture. "I am ashamed of my silence." The courtroom held its breath, suspended between disbelief and dawning understanding. The lines etched on Vivian Beaumont's face seemed to deepen, a silent testament to years of unspoken truths. Even Harding seemed momentarily stunned, his usual air of aggressive confidence momentarily faltering. The scent of lilies, a constant presence in the courtroom, seemed to amplify the tension. their sweet fragrance now strangely discordant with the heavy weight of revelations. The courtroom, once a battleground, now felt like a space where truth, however painful, was slowly beginning to surface. Elena's breath hitched in her chest, a mix of relief and the lingering fear of what still lay ahead. The fight wasn't over, but the tide, undeniably, had turned. The courtroom's hushed expectancy crackled like static electricity. Sunlight, filtering through the stained glass windows, cast kaleidoscopic patterns on the polished floor. Each colored shard seemed to amplify the intensity of the moment, highlighting the stark contrast between the opulent setting and the raw emotions laid bare. Elena felt Maya's small hand gripping hers, a silent reassurance. Leo, ever observant, watched Catherine Beaumont with wide, apprehensive eyes. Catherine's confession hung in the air, a fragile butterfly caught in the spotlight. Her voice, though trembling, held a newfound strength, a defiance that surprised even Elena. She spoke of her father's manipulations, his ruthless ambition disguised beneath a veneer of charm and privilege. The words, once whispered behind closed doors, now echoed through the cavernous space, shattering the illusion of the Beaumont dynasty's invincibility. Vivienne Beaumont, her face a roadmap of anxieties and unspoken sorrows, seemed to shrink further into her chair. Her frail hands, gnarled and spotted with age, clutched a crumpled handkerchief. A single tear escaped, tracing a slow path down her wrinkled cheek, a testament to years of silent endurance. The atmosphere shifted. The air, thick with tension moments before, seemed to thin, allowing a sliver of hope to penetrate the suffocating weight of secrets. Harding, Arthur's formidable lawyer, his usual air of arrogant confidence visibly shaken, shifted uneasily in his seat. His meticulously groomed appearance couldn't mask the rising panic in his eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again, his expression a mixture of disbelief and dawning fear. A low murmur rippled through the gallery. Whispers, initially hesitant, grew bolder, fueled by Catherine's startling revelations. The silence, once heavy with anticipation, now thrummed with a nervous energy, a collective intake of breath as the truth slowly unfurled. Elena felt a wave of relief wash over her, potent and bittersweet. Catherine's testimony was a crucial turning point, yet a chilling uncertainty remained. The fight was far from over. Arthur, a master manipulator, would undoubtedly retaliate. But for now, in this moment suspended between disbelief and dawning understanding, Elena allowed herself a small, fragile hope to bloom. The seed of justice, planted so long ago, was finally taking root. The battle was far from over, but in the hushed courtroom, under the stained glass glow, a new dawn was breaking. The courtroom buzzed with a low hum of anticipation, the air thick with the scent of old wood and expensive perfume. Elena squeezed Maya's hand, the child's small fingers surprisingly strong. Leo, perched between them, fidgeted, his eyes darting nervously between Catherine and Arthur Beaumont, whose face was a mask of controlled fury. Catherine's confession had shaken the foundations of the Beaumont Empire, but the battle was far from over. "Your Honor," Harding's voice, smooth as polished marble, cut through the murmur. "My client vehemently denies these allegations. Miss Beaumont's testimony is clearly emotionally driven, lacking in substantial evidence." He glanced at Arthur, who offered a curt nod, his eyes cold and calculating. Elena felt a chill snake down her spine. Harding's words, though carefully chosen, were a calculated attack designed to undermine Catherine's credibility. She saw a flicker of doubt in the eyes of some jurors. The fight was about to get much harder. That evening, huddled in their small, borrowed apartment, the weight of the day pressed down on them. Maya, usually so bright and playful, sat quietly, her eyes filled with a sadness that mirrored Elena's own. Leo, ever perceptive, sensed the shift in mood. He climbed onto Elena's lap, his small arms wrapping around her neck. "Mama," he whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "Will they take us away?" Elena swallowed, her throat tight with unshed tears. She pulled him closer, burying her face in his soft hair. the scent of his shampoo a comforting anchor in the storm. "No, mi amor," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "They won't. We'll fight for what's right. Always." The words were meant to reassure him, but they also served as a reminder to herself. The fight wasn't just about justice. It was about protecting her children, about securing their future, a future she had always dreamed of, a future that had seemed impossible until this unexpected twist of fate. The fight was for their hope. The fight was for their love. The fight was for their very lives. The borrowed apartment felt smaller than ever, the scent of damp plaster clinging to everything. Rain lashed against the window panes, mirroring the storm raging inside Elena. Maya, usually a whirlwind of energy, lay curled on the sofa, a miniature replica of Elena's own exhaustion. Leo, sensing the tension, clung to Elena's leg, his small hand gripping her ankle with surprising strength. "Mama," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the drumming rain. Will they hurt us?" Elena knelt, pulling him close. His fear was a tangible weight in her chest, a physical ache that mirrored the anxiety gnawing at her. "No, mi amor," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "They won't. We have friends now." The memory of Mrs. Gable, the former Beaumont housekeeper, offering her a safe haven, a place to hide, brought a flicker of warmth to Elena's heart. And then there was Mr. Harding, the lawyer, whose fierce determination had surprised even her. He was a beacon in the darkness. The phone rang, jarring them from their silent vigil. Elena's heart pounded in her chest as she reached for it. It was Mr. Harding. "Elena." His voice was grave, but there was a hint of cautious optimism. "We have a breakthrough." Catherine's testimony, while emotionally powerful, lacked the hard evidence needed. "But we found something." A hush fell over the tiny apartment. Even Maya stirred, her eyes wide. Elena leaned closer to the phone, her breath catching in her throat. "It's a series of emails," Harding explained. "Arthur's emails. They detail his attempts to discredit you, to cover up everything." A wave of relief washed over Elena. Hard evidence. The proof she needed. The rain outside seemed to lessen its fury, the storm within her slowly subsiding. She felt a surge of hope, a fierce determination blooming in her heart. "We'll use this, Mr. Harding. We'll use this to fight for our future." Her voice, though still trembling, held a newfound strength, a resonance that echoed the unwavering love in her heart, a love that transcended wealth, privilege, and the dark secrets of a crumbling dynasty. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, Elena felt a glimmer of hope pierce the darkness. They would fight. They would win. For their love. For their lives. The courtroom felt stifling, the air thick with anticipation. Elena sat beside Maya and Leo, their small hands clasped in hers, a silent pact of strength. The scent of old wood and polished brass mingled with the nervous sweat of the onlookers. Catherine Beaumont, Arthur's estranged daughter, was on the stand, her testimony a carefully constructed dam against the tide of Arthur's lies. Her voice, though hesitant at first, gained strength as she recounted years of her father's manipulations, his callous disregard for others, his desperate attempts to maintain his image. Elena watched Catherine, a flicker of gratitude in her heart. This woman, once a stranger, was now a vital ally. A sudden hush fell over the room as Mr. Harding presented the emails. The crisp, official-looking printouts seemed to radiate an almost tangible power. Arthur, his face a mask of controlled fury, watched with narrowed eyes as the dam began to crack. The words on the screen spoke of blackmail, threats, and systematic attempts to destroy Elena's reputation. Maya, sensing the shift, squeezed Elena's hand tighter, her small body trembling slightly. Leo, however, remained surprisingly calm, his gaze fixed on his mother's face. He didn't understand the legal jargon, but he sensed the momentous change in the atmosphere. The weight of the situation was palpable, a silent pressure hanging over everyone present. Even the air itself seemed to hold its breath. The judge's gavel brought a jarring end to the tense silence, but the impact of the emails lingered, a ripple effect in the stagnant pool of the courtroom. The tide had turned. The carefully constructed facade of the Beaumont dynasty was crumbling, brick by brick, under the weight of undeniable truth.